Welcome to this week's episode of On Record PR. You are here with one of your hosts, Jennifer Simpson Carr, and I'm so excited to be joined today by one of our esteemed international faculty members, Val Madamba. It's so nice to see you, Val.
Same to you, Jennifer. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think something that we've talked about is it feels like content is being created at a higher volume than ever before. And when we say
hmm
content, thought leadership in the form of written, spoken, webinars, in-person client events, you name it, in-person programs have really been back in full swing for a few years now. So with all this content created by law firms, at the same time, the people that law firms are trying to reach are feeling a little bit of content overload. There is a lot coming at them, a lot of opportunities for them to attend things, read information in their inboxes. And so what we're finding is that the bar has quietly been raised,
Mm.
and in-house counsel and executives are really being much more selective about where they're spending their time, whether that's reading, signing into a webinar, attending something in person for the day. And so our conversation today is really framed, I think, by law firms not just saying, can we put something together on this topic, but how do we really make the content worth the time for the people who are choosing whether or not to attend? So I think that's really where I'm seeing a shift happening.
Yeah, you framed that so well from this sort of default of starting with topics and content, which is where I think lawyers, and I'm a lawyer, and we can get a little bit into my how I came into this, but we think of legal value in all of our content and thought leadership traditionally as in information and sharing as many topics as we can. And like you said, the landscape has shifted away from that over the years, but right now, especially, of course, with AI and just the commodification of, or is it commoditization? I don't even know. I don't know. One of those words. It's a commodity, right? Everyone can get it, access it pretty freely and easily. So the question really is, what is value and thought leadership through our events?
So let's talk a little bit about your background because you bring such a unique perspective to this conversation and to the insights that you share. And I will not do it justice, but very quickly before I ask you to tell us more, you were a big law attorney and worked in government as a regulatory lawyer. And so you've got the perspective not only of the law firms who are looking to attract in-house counsel and clients, but also the client side of this. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you mentioned, I came from a food regulatory or food and drug regulatory background. I was at the US FDA to start my career, then went into big law, and then spent a long time in-house in life sciences and food manufacturing and delivery companies. So, really quite a niche practice. And then I became a consultant in the food regulatory space. So, it's kind of been an obsession of mine as I became a presentation and communications consultant to bridge the gap between both sides because everyone's focused on value, but we're all defining it in a different way. And when I was a consultant and even as an associate in big law, like cranking out these decks so I could give them to the partners and just thinking, okay, I'm gonna pack as much as I can. Everything I've researched, I'm gonna turn my memos into decks, and that's gonna be good. And so I just I did that, and I handed them off, and that seemed to be okay. Like that seemed to be valuable. And I had no idea what was going to happen with all of that information and whether it was going to be valuable to any sort of audience. And like when we're billing, there's not a lot of time to pause and think as I try to help people do now. What does the client really need? Why are they showing up? What are they giving up their time to do,
Hmm.
to be here with me. So yes, kind of long story short, have the experience from both sides. And when I was in house, I would go to lots of these events hosted by law firms, both the content type of events and the other bucket, which tend to be, social kind of client development and just updates and checking in. Lots of these types of events, hoping to just come back illuminated and feeling like I was going to be a better version of myself and more equipped to show up and shine as an in-house counsel. And, I think despite great intentions and I mean, being some of the best advisors on the planet, these legal events and the speakers, they just kind of always left me feeling like, and now I have all this homework to do. I'm overwhelmed with information that I don't even have time to digest. And so that led me to want to be a better communicator myself and try to figure out how to turn legal content, especially the most complex legal content that I was dealing with, into experiences and trainings and moments that would be valuable. And I started doing that and practicing that as an in house lawyer myself and educating and training my internal clients.
You've touched on so many important things, and something I want to go back to is the visual that I have of you and so many associates and in-house business development and marketing professionals cramming content into PowerPoint decks and
Yeah.
having to go back to the attorneys and say, no, we can't put it in 10-point font. It needs to be visible from the back of a room, right? So
Yes.
I say that in jest, of course, but I want to come back to that because you and I put out a poll on LinkedIn recently and we let it run for a week. And we asked our LinkedIn network, where do you see the biggest challenge when preparing for a presentation, panel, or client event? And we will put a picture up in the show notes of the results. But the options that we gave were not enough time to prepare, making it engaging or relevant, too much content not focused, and managing panel dynamics. And unanimously, the two that came out on top in order were making it engaging and relevant, which is really the core of our conversation today, and too much content not focused, which is the visual I had when you
Mm.
kind of explained how those presentations were put together very early on in your career for the partners. So I want to ask you, were those results surprising to you? How did you feel when you saw them?
Yeah, those results are right in line with what's been challenging for me when I was in practice and what I see every single day. And especially because people are time starved. I think if we have the luxury of time to only be working on our presentations, we probably take a much different approach. But because, we're always so frenzied and, we're trying to pack this in, we end up taking that topic driven approach. And I think that the solution really does go back to what we touched on before, which is just taking that space to think about what is this speaking engagement, this CLE or client event, what is it for, and why would someone choose to show up? And it really, I think, starts with having that conversation with someone who represents the ideal client. And it's always something that I recommend people do with at least a sample of ideal clients or ideal audience members, just sitting down and, building that into your natural conversational flow or your check-in flow. It's a really
Mhm.
great reason to reach out. It's very genuine and it serves everybody. You want to know like what are the challenges that you're dealing with on a certain topic, and I would say make sure to go beyond just the list of topics because I found that if we have that conversation with a client and we say, what would be most helpful for us to dig into in this CLE that I'm thinking about doing? They'll maybe they haven't had a whole lot of time to think about it, and they'll often, at least at first blush, give you an expansion to your topic list. So now you've got more topics and subtopics.
Mhm.
And what we really need to dig into is what is the challenge? What are the pressures? Why is this why is this a challenge? And what do you hope to do? What do you hope to be different after our talk? And then as the expert, you filter everything that you deal with, your client work, what you believe the solutions are, and then you identify what that intersection is between the client challenges and how you're equipped to help. So not just a topic list, but really focusing on what's one tool or what's one framework that we can focus on, the keyword being just one,
Hmm.
that in this event that will empower or help the audience move in the right direction. And I really want people to take to heart that it's okay and it's preferable to focus, to really, really focus. You don't need to do everything. We can't do everything, solve every
Hmm.
challenge in a 30 or 60-minute, usually 60-minute CLE, right? And your audiences don't want you to do that. So, I mean, good news to presenters and event hosts, like you're really, really off the hook from covering everything
Hmm.
because people can't deal with it. They want a one thing.
And your perspective is so important because I see that firms will say we should cover this, and that's great. And then the step of asking clients exactly how a program should be structured to add value to them isn't often taken. And so
Yeah.
having that client feedback and what value would look like to them is so important. So I just wanted to reiterate that that's a really key component to a good first step in building really any content. So I know that this is a more general question, but I want to keep in that vein. What generally would you say are the key characteristics of a great presentation that an audience would be looking for right now?
Yeah, I think, okay, so we've covered, I think, at length going beyond the basics of what they like a 101
Hmm.
level. And this is something that I've uncovered recently in a lot of conversations I've had, especially with in-house counsel. So I spent the beginning part of this year really focusing on surveying and interviewing in-house counsel about what they want from law firm events because I, from my experience, had my instinct about it, my own lived experience at these events, but I wanted to have more data. So I did this research with about 60 in-house lawyers, and a couple of really important key themes came up. And one of them is to just really focus on what they cannot get anywhere else. And so that 101 level overview, even legal updates, like we can get those so readily ourselves now. And especially our most sophisticated clients, they know where to get the information they need. And
Hmm.
and for firms that might be including your own newsletters and updates. So you might already be serving them in that way in terms of content. But what they can't get might be access to, let's say, a key official or an industry veteran who might be, let's say, a trainer or keynote speaker that you bring in. So access to somebody with insights that they can't find anywhere else. I think another really important point in terms of that sort of exclusive value is benchmarking and law firms being able and willing to say, we're going to go beyond just the annual update and we're going to walk through the patterns that we are seeing from our practice. And of course, you do this in a responsible, anonymized way, but being able to benchmark and say that these are the most relevant patterns, here's what people are trying and what's working. Here's how we're thinking about risk with certain types of entities. I think that benchmarking is really key, and it's a one of the main things that people are looking for these days.
So we're going to pause here for a message from our sponsor, and when we get back, we can wrap up the conversation about delivering real impact in these opportunities and these experiences versus just sharing information.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Ruble Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses worldwide. With an expert team positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by an international faculty, Furia Ruble enhances our clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation, protecting brand and reputation, and supporting internal marketing teams. To learn more, visit furiaruble.com.
So we're back from our sponsor message, and you really described the expectation of shifting from basic delivery of information to designing programs for impact. Can you share with our listeners how that works in practice?
Yeah, I'd say just one principle to keep in mind for whenever you're planning an event, whether it's one webinar or whether it's a much more extensive like practice group summit, everything you do and the approach you take to each of these events, think of it as a preview, a demo of what it's like to work with you, because that is really what it is, and that I think applies to all of our communications, and the way that we engage prospects before any sort of engagement, or the way we re-engage with clients that we might want to be back in touch with in a more meaningful way. So I think treating every event like a live demo is so important. And then I think the going back to the challenge of engagement, was it over 70%? Over 70% of respondents?
Yes, over
Yeah.
70%. Making a challenge was making it engaging and relevant.
Yeah, I think that we have this default notion of, especially the legal content focused events, that they're supposed to be lectures and that there's supposed to be a certain amount of distance between the presenters and the attorneys and the audience. And yes, there is room for big stage, large format events, but I really think that it can be so much easier to design events that become conversations, because that's ultimately what we're leading to. I think that a lot of the folks that I'm speaking with who are challenged with engagement are thinking about the conversation as a separate thing from the event. But if we stop thinking that way and started thinking about or designing our events to be conversations and to feel like conversations, or to actually facilitate meaningful dialogue between the attorneys and the audience, we would be skipping a step and really making things so much more valuable and much easier for everybody. It's actually making me think of there's a quote that I heard recently. I wish I could attribute it. I'll have to look at it, but it was about engagement. If you want to engage people, engage with them. And I heard that recently, and I was like, of course, engage with them. Just do it in the context of your event. And there are so many fun but appropriate and elegant and interesting and novel ways to engage even a legal audience, even an audience that comes in skeptical, with their arms crossed, and to warm them up in a non-cringe and very effective way. And that is really the fun for me in what I do in terms of event design.
It's such a great point because when we generally think about law firm events, we do think larger scale, at least I do. And as you were sharing that perspective, I thought of two different examples that in practice we utilized at different firms. And it was because we found that GCs wanted a format where it was safe to ask questions. And so at one firm, we implemented roundtables where we would
Mm,
have one of our partners and then an industry leader, someone from the government or, someone with very extensive background. And then we would invite 6 to 8 clients. And it was Chatham House rules, but it was a safe place over dinner where they could talk about things in the industry and feel comfortable engaging. And certainly that didn't entail PowerPoints and kind of some of the AV and all of the things we think about. It did entail preparation on the part of the two facilitators. But the other one that came to mind, just as an example for the audience, is we would take the step at one of my firms of going to one of our biggest clients and saying, CLE ends, right? And we want to help your in-house team get their credit. We'll build a day for you. We'll fly out the attorneys hosting. And because it is with your department, it can be an interactive, engaging experience all day. And it was allowing us to stand there in context to the client itself with, the industry expertise and the understanding of the work we had done all year. And of course, it ended with a day, it was in St. Louis. It ended with a day where we would treat them to a Cardinals game at the end of the
Nice.
CLE
Yeah.
day. But it was really a place where we provided an opportunity for them to engage and ask questions and be vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
and leave with a better understanding in context. So I just wanted to share those for our listeners as examples, but it really struck me what you said about giving the attendees a safe space to participate.
I love that you brought that up. And those are such great examples. And I am seeing, I don't know if it's a trend exactly, but I am seeing a lot more small format, a lot more appetite for small format events like these roundtables or retreats where there's just space and it is safe and there are guidelines. So people feel like not only are they taken care of and it's going to be a safe container for them to ask questions and to share what is working, what might not be, but also to feel like they are in an almost alternate reality. And I don't think this is a stretch because this is what we want to do with events. It is not it is ideally not a time to be checking your email, even though we've all done it. Like check in like we are taking time out of our workday and so we're feeling stressed about what's awaiting for us after the event. We have all been there. But when an event host can create an experience that is guided, where your attention and your energy are being facilitated in a really active way, so it doesn't take a lot of your mental energy, and you're finding there's a lot of value in the event itself, and there's space for you to be thinking about and engaging with challenges and engaging with your peers. That's another big thing I'm hearing people want. This is a luxury. And it's the way that I encourage event hosts to think about luxury that we're creating for clients and attendees. And yes, take them to the Cardinals game, like take them to a cool dinner or whatever. Like I love that. But that I think for especially for somebody like a GC or a busy in-house practitioner who's a specialist, it's very rare that they get those moments to really breathe and engage in a deep and facilitated way with these issues. And that's what's going to leave them feeling refreshed instead of overwhelmed when they leave.
It's such an important distinction. So really feeling empowered and inspired and encouraged versus, oh my gosh, how do I take this back and do anything with it?
Yeah,
Because we've
exactly.
been on both sides of that. Okay, so for our listeners, we always try to leave them with one practical step. So if they've heard everything today and they've thought this is such a great idea, we really need to be offering experiences versus information facilitation to our attendees. What is one next step that someone listening to this podcast could go back to their law firm and talk to them about a way to make a practical shift?
Okay, so I would say that if you've gotten to this point in the podcast, you either have, yeah, maybe you've spoken before or you've advised on some sort of content event. And so I want you to think about a presentation, a CLE, a practice group summit agenda that you have coming up. And you probably don't have a ton of time to devote to overhauling it, but I want everyone to remember that even just a small shift, a small tweak that makes the event or the, let's say, CLE feel more conversational, that is a huge opportunity because it's a moment that you can bring back attention even when it's waned. And it's okay if it does wane or you get a little bit into the weeds in a conversation. It happens to everybody. But to the extent that you can build in just moments and have these moments in your back pocket to create a conversational vibe. So if you look at a slide deck that you're about to deliver, like next week, and you've built it around topics, where is one space that you could have your audience come up for air and just add in a reflection question that brings it back to them? And so that kind of creates a moment of exchange between both sides. So you could ask something like, what is one scenario? What's one negotiation where you could see yourself applying the tactic we just talked about? And just give them a moment so they can integrate all the content. And then you can move on to the next topic. Let's say you're closing, you can ask what's one of the tactics that you're excited to try with your team today. And just think about, what are with every presentation you do, how can you add a bit of an element of a back and forth? And that can work in a room of 5, and it can work in when you're presenting to a room of 500.
Mhm. That's excellent feedback, and it's absolutely something our listeners can take back and apply right away. So thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It is really important. It's timely, again, because there's so much content being generated, and it is a way that firms can differentiate themselves if they can really set what they are doing apart from kind of the noise in the market, if you will. So thank you for your time. Thank you so much to our listeners. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or colleague. Continue sending your ideas for topics and guests to podcast@onrecordpr.com. And we will see you again at our next episode in 2 weeks.
On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Ruble Communications. This episode is edited by Isabel Horan and Christian Yamula. Visit www.onrecordpr.com for resources and more information.